parallel session going on about ransomware and what kind of a menace it is. So this could be a perfect attacking vector for an attacker when it comes to sending a spyware or a ransomware. So I don't have time to go through each and every malicious application that I've mentioned here, but just keep an eye out. There are so many different damaging applications, malicious applications that can come into your PC or your laptop or your mobile phone through these kind of attack vectors. So you have to be very careful. And now we are coming on to this very important discussion about privacy. Because yes, we would like to share our details, we would like to share our family relationships, and we would like to share our good times through Facebook and other platforms. So with that comes a big question about privacy. So one of the biggest problems that we have is that the amount of information that you are releasing to the public, general public, means that that information is also available for these bad guys. So what they do is they build up a virtual identity around you. So your digital footprint is big enough, they can actually build up a person on behalf of you. So basically hijacking your identity, hijacking your digital identity, and then you feel isolated because there is no way for you to retrieve your identity, digital identity, because someone has locked you out from your email account, maybe because of something you have given away as information. And that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that, yes, you're not giving away too much information, but you're giving away enough information for people to target you. So this is not necessarily, sometimes it's a violation depending on the legal landscape. But sometimes companies can find out about this information, like things you have liked, pages you have liked. Right? So maybe the pages you have liked gives out enough information for a company to create a marketing campaign around you. Right? So these are some of the big concerns that we are facing these days when it comes to privacy. So what do attackers and bad guys use for this? Well, they have so many techniques. They can write scripts for data scraping. Data scraping is something that, they just look for anything that is available public about a certain person by giving a particular user ID, and whatever that is available public will be retrieved. So that is one thing. And then we have this very fancy word saying Google hacking is basically finding out information about people through Google. Right? So Google is a fantastically powerful search engine which provides enough information about a lot of things. Some things that you might not even be aware of, because it might not be your fault, because it might be your company's fault or somebody else's fault that has put up there. But that is a big concern. And then we have third-party applications. Maybe you have a Facebook app, but at the same time, you have downloaded a third-party application that is interacting with Facebook, because you need Facebook's access to, log into the system. So once you give that permission to that third-party application, the third-party application can, whether you know it or not, obviously you say, I agree, and then you don't know what happens behind the scenes. So this third-party application might withdraw a whole lot of information about you. And then one day they might be, this third-party application, the entire server might be, compromised. And on that particular day, your data is available in the public domain. Right? So things that you might not have expected before, including your photos and videos and things like that. So there's always a tracking back to your social media account, but there is nothing you can do about it because you have actually given permission. So cybersecurity researchers are constantly working on, preventing these kind of leakages and to, have checkpoints here and there. But we are always one step behind. So there's nothing we can do about, people who are over curious about certain things and, trying to work around these security measures. So as I said, your likes and your tweets and things like that, your Instagram stories, reposting can be quite a wonderful place for advertisers so that they find out your interests, right? And even scams that I have mentioned before can lead to privacy violations, because obviously you're going to divulge enough information and then eventually it can be a problem. So as I mentioned before, there's another side to the story, which is actually more towards the criminal side of the story, which is strangers, connecting with strangers. Might not be a big issue with the adult contingent of the country, but mainly with teenagers. This seems to be a huge problem uh, because they find social media as a wonderful place to make new friends, which is nothing wrong with that. But it's just that, statistically, 16% of the teens are connected to friends on social networking sites. They have no idea who this person is. So that's a very, very dangerous number. These are not my numbers. These are numbers that are coming from research. Um, so it can obviously result in all the bad things I've told you before, including phishing attacks and privacy violations, identity theft. Someone might have enough information about you to, completely hijack your digital personality. So that's a very dangerous situation. And of course, it can go into like even more serious situations like stalking and bullying and harassment and, even blackmail. Because if you're gullible enough and if you're vulnerable, they might get too much information from you so that you end up in a blackmail situation. So harassment and cyberbullying is something that people are constantly facing through social media platforms. Before social media, this used to happen through emails, but these threatening kind of emails, try to overwhelm the victim with email messages. But it doesn't have to be email these days. As you know, everything that I mentioned here in this slide is practically applicable to your messenger thread or WhatsApp or something like that. Right. So these are very, very serious situations. People spreading rumors about you, making defamatory comments so that your personality is attacked and things like that. So this is something we see very commonly against social media personalities and activists. And sending negative messages directly, and you can impersonate them because it's a digital domain. Nobody knows the verification behind it. So somebody might be pretending to be you and then put up something very controversial that will affect you in a very negative manner. And the other improvements of these social media platforms that we see is, of course, this live feeds, whether it's a live chat. And if you take Instagram, for example, Instagram Live now allows you to, have live conversations with 2-3 people, and then other participants can also join in, and where you might be actually harassed and bullied. And then there's nothing you can do because it's a live platform. The content is not moderated. So these are very serious issues that we are seeing on the social media domain. And of course, it can even go further, right? I mean, like you might actually get content that you are not happy with, and you're threatened by it, and the material that are offensive. So these are very, very big problems that we are trying to continuously sort. But obviously, you can see these kind of problems will not have a technical solution to it. So it has to be an administrative solution. So I think when Kanishka will be talking about the solutions and reporting mechanisms that we have in place, you might get a good idea about, okay, how can we navigate around these problems, or how can we actually face these problems once it happens to us. Fake accounts, as I said at the very beginning, is a big problem. Even in Sri Lanka, it's a big problem. Just to give you a number of statistics, which might surprise you. Every few months, I would say 6 months, social media companies, including Facebook, they tend to remove about 1 billion fake accounts. So that's a huge number. That's about 25% of the total number of social media Facebook accounts in the world, for example. So these are big problems. Now, I mean, you can see obviously an example here in my screen. There are so many Donald Trumps in Twitter. And the problem with this is, now here's an example, it's a fantastic example. A 21-year-old delivery boy in Pennsylvania managed to impersonate a Trump family member. The worst part is, even eventually that person managed to fool Donald Trump as well. So that's actually how serious it is, because Twitter is a place like that. So when it comes to fake accounts, there are obviously two main problems. One is what we call bot fake accounts, and the other ones are handmade fake accounts. The second one is what you're familiar with, maybe because you know there's somebody who wants to damage your reputation or do something bad. So they create a fake account using enough information, collecting images. That's one thing. And the other side of the story is, these dark web, where people actually create fake accounts by the bulk, right? So creating fake identities, or maybe the identities were obtained through another leak, and then create accounts in a bulk. So it can be thousands and thousands of fake accounts. They don't really target an individual. They just create these fake accounts for many different purposes, including, buying likes. I don't know whether you know about this. So you see a content in social media suddenly, and it has about 16,000 likes. Have you ever wondered, it has only been there for about 5 minutes, but it has 16,000 likes? So how does that happen? Well, sometimes the content can be promoted through this dark web, where people actually pay to get likes. So this is called, there are things called like farms in countries like China and many other countries, where actually you have to, even in India, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are so many examples, like farms, where you can actually, this is a paid service, right? So you get likes as a service. So that's something you need to keep an eye out for. So the fake accounts can actually, once again, what can it do? Well, the damage can be related back to all the things that I told you before, including, cyberbullying, identity theft, and many other things, including, these malicious applications and things like that. Right. So the next 5 minutes, I want to talk about something a little bit unexpected. Maybe you did not expect to hear about this part in a cybersecurity conference, for example. But I would like to take this opportunity to talk about this part because it's part of our security, because our overall security includes our mental space. So mental security is very important. This is related to social media addiction. So I think this is something all of us know that exists, but none of us would like to acknowledge it. So that's something I don't think I'm saying anything wrong when I say that. Especially among the teenagers, about 27% of them, they tend to spend 3 or more hours on social media. And out of that, 5 to 10% users are addicted to social media. So addiction, it's a very serious word that I'm using here. It's not like I like social media, it's I'm addicted to social media, which is completely different in the domain of psychology, obviously. So addictive social media use is nothing different to drug use or substance abuse. Why do I say that? Because research has been done in many universities, including University of California, where this addiction has been studied, and the symptoms of it is directly related to substance addiction symptoms. So it has mood modification factor. So that means, the moment you start, scrolling through the Facebook feed, or, going through your Instagram feed, it changes your emotional well-being, right? It gives you a favorable change in your emotional state, makes you happy, looking at memes and things like that. So you must be thinking, what's wrong with that, right? So that's not the problem. The problem is not mood modification. The problem is you build up a tolerance, right? So you build up a tolerance over time where it increases the amount of time that you need on these platforms. So it increases up to a certain level. I think biologically speaking, since I have a little bit of background in biology before I came into this domain, your brain is working on a dopamine as a neurochemical transmitter. So that dopamine, amount of dopamine that is actually released by spending on social media, actually you are building up a tolerance for that. So the increasing in this over time is a big problem. That means you end up wanting more. So let's assume somebody wants to stop using social media, right? So that's just like, trying to stop using drugs, like substance abuse. So then you get withdrawal symptoms, right? So suddenly you feel unpleasant and, physically and emotionally not well. And this can happen in teenagers, especially when your parents take away your phone or things like that. So that's obviously, these withdrawal symptoms are something that researchers are currently trying to understand how can this happen, because this is actually not a actual physical drug, but that's that's a problem. So with the withdrawal symptoms, of course, the next step is conflict, right? So it can start interpersonal problems, and then it can be even escalated to family level issues. So that's a big problem. And then, just like in real substance abuse, we have the next stage, which is relapse. So if you actually start using social media again, let's say after a break of 3 months, it takes you far less time than before to get back to your previous addiction level, right? So you can start, previously you spent 3 or 4 hours, but once you start relapse, it can be about 6-7 hours you're scrolling through your newsfeed. This is something I wanted to tell you because of the serious nature of it, and there is a message behind it, which is something that obviously it's a message that we should live by anyway. It's like, and do everything with moderation, I guess, right? So as I said, California State University found out that depression has a relationship between this. So that's what we call this social isolation. So the statistics and research is there for you to see. So that's why I just wanted to point this out. And I don't have time to show you this movie trailer, but if you're actually a Netflix subscriber, I would recommend you to watch this. It's called Social Dilemma, which talks about all these aspects, especially this addiction and isolation point that I wanted to talk about. And this particular documentary is actually based on university research. So that's why I wanted you to check that out. So I will share that link on the chat thread so everyone can actually go through it. I have prepared the trailer, but I don't think the audio will play because I'm using the web browser, so I will skip this. Right. And last but not least, Facebook and other social media platforms are a wonderful place for fake news. And not just that, information overload. So what do we mean by overload? That you're seeing the same news over and over again because there's a propaganda behind it, right? Maybe it is a paid piece of news, and you see that over and over again, which makes you, look into it, and then you might share it. But what you don't see is you've been skewed towards that through promotion, right? So you've been skewed towards clicking on that link through constant appearance on your newsfeed. And that is okay as long as the information is valid and genuine. But then what happens if that information is fake, right? So this is something very, very serious that is happening around the world. And well, researchers, even cybersecurity researchers, are constantly working on mechanisms to prevent this from happening. I think Facebook and WhatsApp and these kind of platforms are also working really hard to solve this problem. I think nowadays you see this when somebody forwards you a message from WhatsApp, you see these arrows that says forwarded many times. So that these are some of the attempts taken by these companies to prevent this from happening, because they also have, source checking mechanisms where, certain content is blurred and said that this has been deemed to be fake news through fact checking mechanisms. But this is a huge problem because, money talks. So if you have enough money, you can actually drive a propaganda towards whatever that people want, whatever these people want you to believe, right? So there's always a motivation behind it, whether it is, political motivation or some other motivation, it doesn't matter. So you may be overloaded with information, whether it's fake or not, so that it might start to skew your opinion towards the other side. So our open mind that we had before is gone. So that's why you have to be very careful and take everything with a pinch of salt. Right. Probably the best example is that what we are facing right now when it comes to COVID-19, right? So inventions and innovations about COVID-19, cures and things like that is probably number one in the list these days. Right. So let me just move on to the next part of today's discussion, which is, okay, all these things, what you said might be bad. And, as I said, is it such a horrible place that we should completely avoid? Well, I personally avoid. I'm not in Facebook anymore for the last 2-3 years. But still, I mean, people would like to. I mean, I'm still using Instagram and many other platforms. So that means people would still want to be connected to these platforms. But having said that, what are the best practices that we can follow? So that's what we want to talk about. So when it comes to the best practices, it all starts with your personal information, email, username and the password that you're creating, right? So whenever you're creating social media accounts, try to use an email account that you're not using for your, let's say, official work, right? Cannot be an email account from your office, definitely. That's a no-no, right? So it has to be an email account, and even the email account can be an email account that you created only for social media purposes. So that might be a good way to start. So try to use gender neutral email addresses that doesn't give out too much information about you, and have strong passwords. These are obviously common sense. And how to make your password strong is also common sense, to keep it difficult to guess through, complex combination. And change your password frequently, and use multi-factor authentication. So this is something that is actually provided to you by the social media platforms. Facebook has this two-factor authentication where you can enable OTP-based logging, and even Instagram doesn't allow you to run your Instagram application on another phone without OTP authentication. So whenever these features are available, make sure you enable them and use them, which will actually prevent a lot of problems that people are seeing with this, hacking, all these things. None of these things are actually hacking. It's because you have released your security up to a certain extent. People have loopholes where they can actually sneak in, right? So there's absolutely no need for you to share your password with anyone, even if it's the IT support, right? So even if it's the IT support, we recommend you do not share your password, right? So if they want your password to be typed in, you go there and you type your password. This is something that is commonly exploited in Western countries, especially among elder generation. And there is no reason for you to share this personal information, right? So finally, I don't have time for going through all these separate platforms, but as I said, every single platform has a link for you to understand the comprehensive security solutions they have provided for each and every user, with respect to your privacy, with respect to features like multi-factor authentication, your privacy settings, check who has tried to log into your account previously, from which locations. So all these features are available. So try to explore them and get the best out of it to understand what is your security posture right now as a human being, right? So what is your digital security level? Can you be happy about it? So these features are available. So do a thorough study on it and understand where you sit right now. So if you're satisfied with it, I think you're good to go and you have a relatively good security hygiene, right? So I think that brings me to the end of my part. So what I will now do is I will ask Kanishka to tell you, okay, what happens after when things go bad, obviously. So all these things are preventive mechanisms, but unfortunately, things can go wrong. And once things start to go wrong, you need help, right? So where do you find help, especially in the local context of Sri Lanka? And what kind of remedies and solutions do we have? I think, Kanishka, you can take over now. Meanwhile, I'll try to answer questions. Okay.
Let me share the slides. If somebody is allowing me to share the slides.
Let me see, Kanishka. I think I can. I think might be able.
Okay,
you should be able to share now. All right. Okay.
So let's hope you all can see my slides.
Yes, we can see, Kanishka. You can continue.
All right, thank you. Let's continue our discussion on the type of attacks that are prevalent, like the Prosite request forgery attack, or CSRF, or often this is called as CSRF attack. So this is not an entirely new attack that has been there. And this is a special type of attack mostly associated with social media sites. Right. Let's imagine this scenario. You want to do a transaction on some business that requires authentication. You want to do a transaction from one of your bank accounts to another bank. So you sign in. You log in with your credentials to your bank account and transfer funds. at this point, you open up your browser and let's say you visit your social media site and start accessing the social media site. Now, what you see in this diagram, the orange line that is going from your computer to the banking site is the session that you have logged in. So this session is still open until you log out and turn off your machine and disconnect. So now there are what you call timeouts for this session. Like let's say 15 minutes timeout. Likewise, you can set the timeout. I log into the site and transfer funds, and I log into the Facebook. If you have credentials for the bank and which are more, what happens? The attacker has cement on the site or something when that could give you a forgery. To get their script run and then use the original session to your bank because it looks like your session. So what they are going to do is create a request to your bank that transfer money not to one of your other bank accounts, but directly to them, because the request comes through the session because it looks like a valid and you are sending money to your other account. Now, this is actually a complicated attack, but I may be oversimplifying the scenario. Because you are signed into multiple websites, it is possible to use these sessions against you, and you would never know it looks like a valid to other websites, and they would not know that it's a valid request as well. So how do you prevent these type of CSRF attacks? So one way to do is to log out of websites when you have finished browsing the website and finished whatever transaction you have done, especially in banking websites. So then the other thing that you can do is don't use the same password and if possible username for different sites. Now, as a practice, you sometimes use your email address as a user account. So in that case, you won't be able to change your username to other uh, uh, username if that's the case. So, but in other scenarios, you can always try different username password combinations for sites. Then also another type of practice is to use multi-factor authentication. And also sometimes we always do this for convenience. We always try to remember the username and password on browser. That might be also uh, putting you into trouble as well. So also another thing that you can do is avoid surfing to other sites while you are logged into a site. So this along with those techniques can mitigate the CSRF or cross-site request forgery attacks. So let's move on to the areas like social networking threats for you and your family. So always you have to make sure that as part of the family, you are paying attention to what you are sharing on Facebook, and you are providing information about where you work, where you live, and what time you are at home. This information to criminals. So you have to make sure that you are not putting your family and friends in trouble by sharing this type of information. So another thing is like most photos that you take in these cameras contain geotagging. So it includes location and time of the data. When you share this information on Facebook and other social media sites, this information can also be retrieved by somebody with a malicious intention. So you need to consider about that as well. So another area of concern is sometimes you share your information about place of work and the department you work, your exact birthday. So these things are personally identifiable information that should not be shared with any outside parties. Then as a company also, you have to make sure you are not putting your company also into trouble by various types of um, vectors like social media. One area of concern is social engineering. So social engineering is a common type of threat these days where somebody with a malicious intent will try to capture information from confidential sensitive information from the victim by sending him an email, maybe providing giving him a phone call and try to retrieve information. And these type of things should be a concern as well. So sometimes you accidentally release information that is damaging to the company that you work. So it could be accidental or it could be improper release of confidential information. Like for example, uh, with some sort of malicious intention, sometimes you might release share information about your boss, he's like put a comment about him in your Facebook page where it's defamatory type of information. So that might have a damaging effect to the company as well. So representation and putting unauthorized posts and images would also be some sort of a issue in this context. So the best practices, sometimes we tend to do this while logged into a computer. We leave the machine unattended. So in that space of time, some opportunistic worker or colleague might access your PC and send um, some unnecessary information, put a malicious post or some sort of a damaging post about you, maybe things like that can happen. So you have to always be careful about what you post as well, because once you have posted it, you can delete it later, but you might have copies of the posted information at a later place. Like when somebody is asking you to um, uh, about information about your personal information, where you live and things like that, you have to look at it in a suspicious manner, because easily do not share these type of personal information because it can be damaging at a later stage. When you are using email accounts, also make sure that you use email accounts, one for your official purpose and one for your personal activities. So it's always good to have the work accounts, official accounts and work personal accounts separate, so that it's less risky in case of malicious attack happening. So if you want to remain anonymous, do not list your email address on web pages and other forums that you find on internet. You might get unnecessary mails and spam and all the other malicious avenues opening up, because you know without thinking too much, you share your information. So you have to make your accounts private, steer clear of strangers, and if you are using old social media profiles that are unused, you must delete and remove them. Always use antivirus software, reputed and legitimate ones. Take care of public Wi-Fi, and you have to be aware of fake news, information overload, and cyber propaganda and things like that. So if you seek help, you can always contact this organization called Hitavati, that is available on hitavati.lk website. So they will be specially helping you regarding your issues with social media and other incidents. You can always reach out to them. So that's one area. And also you can report your incident, cybersecurity incident, to report at cid.police.gov.lk. They will help you to resolve any issues, incidents related to social media and cybercrime as well. So with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. So if there are any questions, we can take, or I think time is almost
yes,
run out.
Kanishka, so
So
there were a few questions, and I actually managed to reply some of them on the chat thread. One of the interesting questions was about these can malicious applications be downloaded through just simply by opening an email without clicking on something? So you feel like quite vulnerable in those kind of situations where you didn't even click on it. There are cases that can happen. So we actually call them drive-by downloads. So these kind of things can happen, but when it comes to email-based phishing links, it's highly unlikely. The reason is your spam detectors are quite powerful, and they tend to identify these things very early, these drive-by download links and things like that. But the problem that we mainly have is when you are doing browsing, whether it is social media platforms or any other general browsing, especially if you do not have an antivirus or something like that, it is highly likely that these kind of drive-by downloads can actually happen, because you don't even have to click on a link as per se, but suddenly something might get downloaded because you visited a certain website, and then a JavaScript can be activated, and these kind of things can actually happen. But as long as you practice good browsing hygiene and social media hygiene, should not be a problem. So do not click on things that you are not sure of. And there's always a good practice. What you can see is, like, if you have a link that you think you might want to visit, before clicking on it, you can just move your mouse pointer over the link, and your browser will actually tell you where this link is going to take you to. So if you can see the domain of that URL, and if it shows as a safe website that you are quite familiar with, then you can go ahead. But if you see a very complicated URL with a extended link, then I would recommend you to stay away from those kind of links. So that's something that was asked. And there was another point about two other documentaries, The Great Hack and Terms and Conditions Applied. These are also two good documentaries. I'd actually like to thank the participant who has mentioned them. These are more related towards how the social media platforms are corporate driven, and how the corporates can actually take advantage of your behavior. So that is more towards that. The one that I showed you, Social Dilemma, is more towards social media, psychological addiction, and isolation. So these are all very interesting information sources for you to understand where we are at right now when it comes to these platforms. So I think those are the things that we had to answer. And right, I don't think we have any more questions, and I think our time is also up. Nelushi, you can take over. Yes.
Thank you, Kavinga. Thank you, Kanishka. That was a brilliant presentation, and on time as well. So we really appreciate your efforts. I think ISC Squared and ISACA has done a great job during this workshop. So thank you once again. And we will be moving on to the second segment. This is planning your SOC journey, Simplified. And we have Mr. Chamari Rupasinghe, CISSP member of ISC Squared Colombo chapter, who will be presenting today. Chamara, are you there with us? Hi, Chamara.
Hi, can you see me?
Can you speak a little louder?
I'm ready. Shall I start?
Yes, sure. So we've given present.
All right. Yes, you can see my screen.
Yes, super.
All right, wonderful. Right, so thank you very much, organizing committee, for giving the opportunity. And so the objective here is to give you some insights on the Security Operations Center. I see a lot of people joining. There can be students, undergrads, so some of these areas may not directly apply, but I am trying to, I'll try to explain at briefly as possible. So let's start. Right, so here what we are going to do, we'll discuss about what's the SOC, the Security Operations Center, what are the objectives, why you need the SOC, and then as an institution and entity, what is the objective of having a goal, having a Security Operations Center, the goals or the objectives of it, how basically what should be your approach building a Security Operations Center, the components of it, and a few approaches as well. Right, so let's start with few facts. So the first one, so the important part of having a Security Operations Center, now in 2020, IBM research has identified that the average time taken to identify a breach, now that is basically some entity identifying that some of the asset or information has breached out from this entity, and it has taken average 228 days. So that's almost 7 to 8 months. So it's a big time, right? And the Sri Lanka situation is not that good. We have seen multiple such incidents. It takes months and sometimes even years until the entity or the institution did not know that there has been a breach until a client comes and complains there has been some issue with my account. So these are the real situations that creating impact in our business these days. So a few other facts are also there. You can do some research. There are a lot of areas you can find this information. So let's start by identify why we really need the Security Operations Center. So most of you who are in the enterprise, you know that you are investing a lot on your security infrastructure, the defense part. So you spend a good amount of money every year, strengthening your perimeter, strengthening your boundaries. But if a director or a manager or whoever responsible comes and asks, okay, Sham, now you have invested this much of money, are you 100% sure, or what's the percentage that you can say that the entity is or the enterprise is secure? I think none of us can't say we are 100% secure. So the sophisticated the defenses are, yes, you can improve the defense percentages, but there's no one silver bullet to say that you are 100% secure, safe from all these adversaries out there. And most importantly, the modern attacks are getting smarter day by day. The attackers are getting smarter, the attacks are getting smarter. There are a lot of stealth ways of basically penetrating to any of these assets, I would say, entities. So in the facts that we discussed in the previous slide, how long will it take to identify there has been a breach? And even after we identify the breach, do we have the right information basically to identify what has happened? Basically recreate, maybe for the forensic purposes, do we have that information? So those questions or the concerns actually raised to have some type of platform or some type of mechanism to have more visibility. What is happening in your system, what is happening in your network or the environment. So that visibility, gaining that visibility, and also the ability to record that information or store that information in a more methodical manner. When something has happened, you basically access that information. So at high level, we see two main areas of basically identifying the requirement for a security operations center. So explain a little bit more onto the visibility side of it. So you all know the kill chain, what happens when someone tries to penetrate or breach a system or a network or any entity. So there are things that happen before the breach, and then there are things happen during the breach and after the breach. So now imagine if you have some kind of an indication. Now, earlier we discussed there's no one single bullet. You can't make sure that there's a way to protect everything unless you have like an air gap type of environment. Yeah, you can't actually do that these days. So basically, you needed to have a mechanism to identify. The visibility needs to be there to detect whether someone's trying to breach in, someone's trying to get into your network or the system, whether someone is in the process of getting into your system, or maybe the person or the attacker or the adversary is already inside the network, but he or she has not achieved the target. For example, they have got breached through their gateways, they are already in the network, there's a specific dwelling time, but they have not achieved the end target, or they have not reached the server or the entity where you have all the information. So if you can identify that there has been something going on, or abnormality or the anomaly happening within the network or the system, you can say, okay, there's something wrong, you need to act quickly. So that is the visibility. The objective of having visibility is basically that. You basically decrease the dwelling time of that attacker and you quickly respond. So that way you can actually stop most of the attackers which is happening nowadays. So I have seen this slide. It's a very, very good example. Imagine you keep monitoring and you have certain type of alerts, way of alerting on certain changes. So the person is accessing the enterprise network from a specific geographic location. So in the first graph, you can see the attacker, the person is accessing from one country, and suddenly there has been a chain that that person is actually visible in a separate geography. Okay, that can be simple. Or if you analyze, let's say you are one of your analysts or a security analyst, find it a little bit kind of not normal, start looking into that. So then you find out that person is actually using a third device. So far, up to now, he or she has been using the first two devices, and this specific time, its access happens from a third device. Of course, now you identify, okay, there's something fishy going on. So let's go in depth. You can access further details, and if you find out the amount of data transmitted, the number of sessions that has been accessed, you will find out that there has been some breach happen. It can be the process of command control situation happening at this point. So identifying these will actually help you to prevent all these potential attacks. Right, so now you know why you really need a security operations center. Now let's discuss few challenges that we have. Of course, everyone knows not only security operations centers, but IT has a challenge with the current situation. Everyone started working from home. Now you have to open up all the internal. So there's no perimeter to define. There's no fortified area to protect. So the concept of zero trust is actually now needs to apply. And then because of the cloud also, we have certain segregation, decentralized ways of processing. So you have to find ways of collecting information for your security operations. The other part, there are a lot of activities happening beyond a specific data center environment. When I say data center, this is not about software applications anymore. There are a lot of IoT devices out there. We get a lot of data from IoT. We work with social media and a lot of web sites and applications. We get a lot of data coming in. So now getting all that information into a security operations center for analysis, it has become a big data problem. So now you need to kind of address that challenge as well. Then most importantly, the compliance. I guess you know that the compliance is there to protect you. Now, the compliance can come in many ways. So there are internal compliances. You basically mold something to suit your business. Then you have your regulator putting you certain compliance. Okay, this is how you need to work on. Then you have the external compliances. So geographically, you may have compliances that you need to satisfy, like GDPR, and depending on the domain or specific business area, you may have, whether it's health or finance, there can be different type of compliances as well. So having those compliances, of course, the reason having this is to make sure that you satisfy, but just complying to the compliances is not sufficient. So you need to find other ways, because we'll discuss in the further what are the other aspects of it. But at this point, so to make sure that the compliance would not be sufficient for a security operations center. So then the other one is no one technology that capable of providing the security operations center. Now, this is where a lot of people can forget the misunderstanding when vendors come and say, okay, if you want a security operations center, okay, I have the right technology. No, there's no one technology can provide everything, because security operations center has to be a collective way, because you can have a one technology, but that's been limited, or that have certain specific areas for speciality. So you have to understand all this and write the correct technology, select the right technology for you. And finally, the SOC should not be a burden. Of course, in the current situation, the country is also going through a financial crisis, and then the businesses affecting. So it's difficult to invest. And though you get the right amount of investment to set up a security operations center, you have to maintain it. So maintaining is also not that easy, not that, I would say, cheaper. You have to invest on the people. You need to have the right skill set to maintain. So these are some of the challenges you have when implementing security operations center. There are various other areas depending on the business, the sizes of the company, but I am listing few important ones at this stage. Right. So let's start with what are the goals. So setting now let's say you have got the funding, now you have to set up certain goals. Now we discussed about the compliance. Compliance is the key, because mostly the business will decide, okay, this is what I need. So the overall objective would be to manage risk, mitigate the risk. How I make sure that I can basically achieve these business goals without any cybersecurity or information breach risk. So first one, the compliance, very important. You have multiple compliances that need to support. Then the part which is away from the compliance. Now, most of the time, what we have seen, especially in the Sri Lankan market, the security operations center revolve around compliances. They don't worry about the threats too much and the other aspects of security operations center. They said, okay, now I need to have a SOC. This is a compliance matter. I need to have these reports every month. So give me a platform, or how do I do it? So it is not sufficient, because if you just focus on the compliance, then you will actually not achieving the end results of minimizing the risk. So that is something that we need to kind of think throughout the whole implementation. Now, your goal, the end goal actually will depend or will change depending on the business that you are in. The finance sector will say, okay, these are my goals. Yes, I have my compliances. I need to protect my customer data. I need to make sure all the transactions are secure enough. Then when it comes to retail or the manufacturing or pharma, the whole thing will change. Okay, it says my target is to protect my IPs. I have intellectual property. I have product details. All these I need to make sure that it's not, even from the internal. So you have to make sure it's safely secure. And then there are entities solely focused only on the compliance. So there can be GDPR, there can be, if you go to health sector, it's mostly the HIPAA and sometimes on the keeping the health records secure. So depending on that, your end goal, the objective of the SOC will change, how you are basically going to implement, the size of the SOC, the features of the SOC will change, but general, you have to basically maintain your compliance. You have to manage your compliance and manage your threats. Then doing all this, you have two main options. Okay, should I go for a in-house SOC, or whether should I outsource my SOC services to a third party? Well, if you're having a SOC in-house, that's good because you have the full control. You know about the business and you know what to implement, how to basically customize your SOC according to your requirement, how to get all the data in, all the information in, get that output as per the required. And then when there is an incident, analyzing, going through that incident is faster because you know what is happening, you know the elements, you can actually get the support of the other divisions as well. Yes, it's a high investment, and also not the capital investment. Addition to the capital investment, the maintaining is also quite expensive because you have to have the people. Without the people, your SOC is just a basic log collector. So when you go to the outsource model, there's no capital investment, of course, but it doesn't mean that it's cheap. You pay monthly, sometime the end you'll be paying more than the initial investment, because when you are selecting the right security outsource SOC, you need to get the right output from them. Because most of these service providers have good qualified people. They have we have the experience of, because of those resources, the implementation would be faster. You'll get good results out of it in a well-defined manner, and then you get a good support as well. But outsource maybe not for everyone. If you are a large enterprise, you won't be able to send all your information. You know how much of information generated inside your network or your data center. So you really can't send all that information to outsource SOC. Whereas if you don't have all the information for the SOC analyst, that doesn't mean you get everything get analyzed. So you have to be kind of a mix and match, define specific use cases, and get basically do the incident response or the monitoring only based on those specific areas. So pros and cons, there are a few other things depending on the requirement, your end goal, your funding availability, you need to select the right approach for this one. So let's discuss a little bit on the main components of the SOC. So when you're implementing a SOC, there are actually three main areas. We call it the SOC pillars. So there are three main SOC pillars: the people, process, and the technology. And for your benefit, I have put two more additional things: the business and the services. So business is, you can say at this moment, the definition, input. What they say, okay, this is what I want, the driving factor. Then the services is the expectation or the output from the security operations. And so it's very important you identify the priorities of this. So business, we discussed, it's the setting up the goal, the business drives. Okay, my requirement is to secure these areas, whether it's the customers, I need to, the governance, the compliance side of it, and the privacy of my employees, the clients, and the security of it. So the business will define what it will require, and based on that, your funding will get approved. Then the most important part. So you get the goal, you get the funding, now you need to set up, or even to evaluate an outsourced SOC, you need to have the people who knows about it. So people, it's starting from your SOC journey, you need to have people, and then implementation, you need to have people, and then maintaining your SOC or the operational aspects of it, you need to have good people. So operationally, it's a big subject to discuss about the people factor, the human capital for a security operations center. But in a simplified way, in a typical, you may have like a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 type of analysis. We call it either level 1 analyst, level 2, the same thing. And in general, there are kind of a defined structure. Say, okay, tier 1, you are the base level analyst who are looking into the initial alerts or looking after the basic operation. And if they find something like an incident type of, if you classify it's some activity as an incident, you can get a level 2 or a tier 2 engineer to investigate. So at tier 2, mostly it's the investigation part, and then the next level of actions. And certain times, the certain incidents will actually go to the tier 3 level as well, where there's deep analysis needed, advanced investigation if there is forensic activity needed. So all this will actually define the flow of your incidents, and then you have structure. So there are other aspects. You have the engineers, you have the SOC managers. So it's a well-defined structure that you need to have people to run a security operations center. Then even though you have people, you have to make sure that the people are properly, their knowledge properly updated. Knowledge needs to be managed. You need to test their knowledge and see whether they are suitable and who's good at which domain. Some analysts are good at the server side, identifying the services. There can be some other engineers look good at internal network side. So depending on that, you can do mix and match. But the important part, when you're starting your own SOC, you're setting up small, then you have the flexibility to change this. You can decide, okay, for a year or so, I'll start with this type of structure. So it's up to you, but there are defined standards. When you mature, you actually can get into those areas. So I'm not discussing about the red teaming to blue teaming and all this information because they are a little bit higher level. Once you mature only, you need to get into those things. So important part is keep your analyst or the SOC structure properly trained, and then require knowledge. Then the equally important part is the process. So now you have the people. Now you have to define a process, how these people should basically operate within the security operations center. If there is an incident, if you classify it as an incident, what is the priority level? How you are going, so all these has to be defined. Now, definition of processes will be done in different types of level. There are standards available. You can do your incident processes and procedures according to the standard. You can adopt the standards which are already written, or you can have your own incident management response standards or other standards aligned to your internal security and IT policies as well. It's all about kind of connecting into the rest of the areas. If there is an incident identified, how we are going to communicate with the IT, how we are going to get the specific asset owner communicated and get it fixed. So it's all about communicating, getting the required reports done, and what are the content needs to go in, and a basic operation of the security operations center. Right. So technology, I mean, yes, it's very important part of technology, but technology should not come first. So you'll always start with your people, process equally, and then when you identify, okay, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to analyze, this will be my use cases, I'll come to the use case a little later, and this is the right technology. Now only you select the right technology. Well, so technology, it's not one technology we discuss, it's like number of technologies working together to provide the right output. So the most important part when it comes to security operation technology is your security analytic platform. So it can be the SIEM, or it can be a big database analytic platform which do the same functionality. The important aspect of selecting SIEM, depending on your requirement, is what type of input it can process. Whether it can process logs, whether it can process flows, the packet information, all that can be processed together, what type of correlation that you can do. Those are very important when you're deciding on your technology. Obviously, the technology or the platform should be able to do proper correlation and do analytics on top of it, can use various intelligence to basically evaluate your analysis or enrich your data, and then use tools, AI tools, to get better results out of it. Then you have to have the case management as well. It's basically to continue your operation. So other important areas are there, database activities, EDR. So there are a lot of tools there. You have to have forensic, you have to have the monitoring, then automation orchestration, we'll discuss a little bit later, important fact. So this comes and you set up your SOC basically. So you need to make sure that you get information from all these aspects, your endpoints, networks, user information, threat intelligence needs to be, so it's all about making sure that you get all the information, because your output will depending on the input that you provide. So there's no IoT there, but IoT is also should be part of the whole input. So the services, it's all about what the results that you are giving out. It can be the reports, the managing of incidents properly, and then the compliance reports, the audit requirements, managing the logs properly. When there is a requirement from the audit division, you should be able to provide basically provide that set of logs to them. Then there are a lot of other aspects as well. Very important, the threat intelligence, not only the external, the intelligence that you create within your institution when you are doing your incident response. Then as we basically mature, you can go into threat hunting type of activities as well. Right, so the approach. So we discussed about the human capital, then the objective we discussed, and then here I'm going to take the word use case. What do you mean by a use case? So use case is actually something that depending on your expectation, the output, what is required, the SOC analyst needs to monitor what type report. Depending on your requirement, you basically, the individual business cases, you create specific, I would say, let's say the word pattern, yeah, it will help you to create the alerts. What is the output? Whether it's a dashboard that you are going to create, whether a set of reports that you are going to bring out. For an example, now, let's say you need to implement ISO 27000 in your security operations center, and you need to get regular reports. You need to detect if there are any non-compliances. All this is part of the input. So what you do, you get the controls. Let's say you get the access control part of it. Now there are 14 controls. Now you can take those 14 controls and create, whether it can be one use case or there can be multiple use cases. Now take one use cases, the user provisioning part, and then deprovisioning part, and then the user life cycle part. You create one use case out of it. Then for that, you have checked the inputs, whether you have the right data, whether I have access to the LDAP, all my identity servers, my access control servers, my privilege access management servers. You check that, you check the gap. If you have that information, you basically create the specific use cases. So you get the information, you create your outputs as dashboards, you create your rules, and where to fire the rules, what are the logic. So you create your use case. So that is the key. If you have the right use cases, the operation will be faster. There are specific parameters like how many use cases can a level 1 analyst can handle. So all these will basically drive your security operation journey forward. So when you do the gap analysis, you identify what are the gaps, you fix it, you get the data in, you create your processes. You can have, as we discussed, your existing processes, the frameworks, ISO type of standard that you are practicing. Then you can get standard processes defined by NIST and certain incident management standards, or the processes defined by meta-attack as well. So you can get that information and you can try implementing, and then you can also customize on the way. Then it's basically setting up your platform and go ahead with your implementation. So once you have your proper implementation, it's your security SIEM or your analytic platform will get the data, process, correlate, and will fire alerts. So your level 1 analyst will monitor. Then if there are incidents, he or she, the level analyst can process. Then if there are requirements to escalate, you can go to the level 2, and level 2 can do further investigations, and further investigations required forensic type of analysis, or let's say malware re-engineering type of work, then you can go to a level 3 or an advanced analyst to carry out. So you use a tool called case management, a workflow kind of a tool. When you set up, it's like a help desk kind of a ticket. So your tickets are there, your cases are created, all the data inside. So it basically takes its own path based on the processes. In between, you can use the advanced analytics, and then while you are doing all those cases, you actually create your playbooks and the runbooks. So it's all about recording your activities, mostly common activities. There are much more larger definitions, so I'm giving a couple of examples. Basically create your playbooks accordingly. So once you create playbooks only, you actually can go to the automation of the security operations center. Now, there's a misconception in the market saying that, okay, when you have a SOC, when you have the SIEM and you buy your orchestration app as well, it's actually a waste of your money because you can't implement automation day one. You have to have a good functioning security operations center. You have to have a fine-tuned security operations center to implement automation. Automation is a must because when you have thousands and thousands of alerts firing, your level analyst will not be able to cope with that. So you need to have some mechanism to basically reduce the workload. How you do that? It's basically automating most of the reports because most of the alerts, it can be false positives, those are the standard things as well. So my time is running out. So very quickly, last couple of slides. The next generation, you have to focus on the open layered architecture, the big data, and the advanced analytics is a must because we are working on a big data world. So that needs then building your internal threat intelligence. It's important, and we discussed about the automation, very important. But these 2, 3 need to wait for a proper mature SOC to implement. Then active defenses and the threat hunting capability will actually generate more value. So maturity model, you can use this link. There's good information there. It's a good maturity model that you can adopt for your security operations center. So the last slide, can we start small? Yes, you can start small. So if the requirement is there, discuss with the management or the decision maker, say, shall we set up something? Doesn't mean that you need to buy expensive tools. Get your staff in, start monitoring your activity. You use your open source tools, you read your logs, monitor your packets, what is happening in your network. You create your processor. That is the most important. When you have certain processors in, it's easy to identify your requirements. So when you are sure with what you need, what you are doing, then let's look at the proper technology in. Once the new technology is in, basically, it's a easy ride. Then we need to work about the maturity part of it. So important to keep your people trained and keep the thing interesting for the analysts because it's difficult to find analysts and it's one of the most paid jobs as well as the most bored jobs. So I think that's the end of my presentation. I tried to put most of the stuff for the given time. I'm not sure that there are any questions. Plus, the time has already elapsed. So over to you, guys.
You have it.
Hi, Chamara. Thanks. Thank you very much for that presentation. Do we have any questions that have come in? Tech team?
Do you have anything on Facebook or YouTube? I don't think I can't see any. Chat?
Nothing that we can see.
So while we wait for questions, we just want to remind our participants that we have 3 more exam vouchers, exam coupons to be given away from Cisco Academy. So the quiz will be held right at the end. So please be with us at the end of the session to try and be a winner. So we want to...
Chamara Rupasinghe, thank you, sir, despite your busy schedule for coming and doing this session for us and everyone who's joined in. SLCert appreciates your efforts. So with that, we will be moving on to our third segment, which is Shift Left, a secure CD/CI pipeline by Mr. Malaka Batuankudawa, CISSP member, IC Squared Colombo chapter. Malaka, are you here with us?
Hello.
Hi, Malaka.
Hello.
So,
Hi. Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you loud and clear. Malaka, do you have a presentation for us? I think we've given you sharing rights as well. Yes, brilliant. All right, with that, I'll hand over this session to Malaka. Thank you.
Hello. Am I good to start? Sorry.
Malaka, you're not audible.
How about now?
Yes, now we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. And you can see my screen as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. So good afternoon to all of you today, and thank you for taking your time off on a busy Tuesday afternoon. And thanks everyone in the organizing committee for putting up a wonderful series of events and programs during the Cybersecurity Week. Today, I'll be speaking about shift left security and how to put that into practice by securing the development pipelines. So a little bit about myself. I work as a senior consultant for cybersecurity at Millennium ITSP, and I have been in the industry for a little over 6 years, and I would say I carry a lot of experience in planning, design, and implementation of various security solutions for the top clients in Sri Lanka and overseas. So that's about me, and let's move on to what I have in store for you. So I want to start off with a bit of history and what is the shift left concept. So where has it happened already? And then I will be covering the security issues which are normally expected in an unsecure CI/CD workflow. Then we'll be talking about the damage caused by security issues in CI/CD workflows. So unless you don't know the damage, it is hard to convince someone to secure it. And then what is our solution for this as security practitioners? And finally, I'll be speaking about how to prioritize all these things. So I wanted to show you this picture as this is something we can't forget as humans. So the software development methods also has taken a similar transition over the years. So in the far left, when we used to practice traditional software development methods, the phases were siloed, and the next phase can only proceed if the previous phase has been completed. So it was very plan driven, and any changes after the project has started would offset the original plan, and it would require a restart of the whole process. So there were benefits of this approach, but obviously the disadvantages outpaced them. So as a result, people came up with new paradigms. So fast forward to the present. So now we are in the era of DevOps, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and deployment. So gone are the days of releasing software once every 7-8 months, and it has come down to weeks, days, and in some occasions, few releases per day as well. So now the objectives have shifted, and the drive is towards meeting business goals as fast as possible. So application development teams are under constant pressure to provide new products, new features, bug fixes, and of course to be the number one. So, and it has also become more customer centric in today's development methodologies. So the principle of shift left is to take a task that is usually done at a later stage of the process and perform that task at an earlier stage. So this is not entirely new, and many industries have already started practicing it. So for example, IT services and operations has started moving service requests to the lowest possible support level first. And that is why they have introduced the self-service portals to reset your own password or to check your account balance before speaking to an agent. So, so if you compare these three software development methods, certain practices have already shifted left. So in traditional methods like waterfall software development, so requirement gathering and design, which usually happens once, have moved to the left. So this is why in modern world you have roles like product owner in the project teams. So the product owner regularly engage with the customer and readjust the business requirements, and they provide real-time feedback to developers and architects based on which they can tweak or maybe rework the design. So otherwise, what happens is people spend weeks and months building the perfect software or project plan, and then when you present to the customer, that's not what they wanted. So in traditional methods, the functional tests as well as non-functional tests like stability, performance, and a bit of security is done just before releasing the product. So while doing so, serious problems can be uncovered. So whereas in shift left testing, the developers, QA teams conduct various tests as early as possible. And this will reduce the possibility of unpleasant surprises at the end of the process. So not only that, even development and operations has moved to early stages. So all in all, the effort is to help development teams make software better and faster. So as with many other things in life, the faster you try to do something, generally you miss out certain things. So considering that, where should we place security in our software development lifecycle? And what should we do about security in this modern, fast-paced development world? So the answer is, it makes sense to introduce security also as early as possible. So think of development of software in today's world as a speeding car, and security guardrails are the brakes that you apply. So speed doesn't make sense if you can't stop or slow down the car at the right time, because eventually you will meet with an accident and cause a huge damage. So likewise in software development, the need for speed neglects or minimize the meaningful security testing. And as a result, vulnerabilities discovered in production application can lead to compromised systems or data. So security should be shifted left and also should be fused into the CI/CD pipelines. So this might be a bit oversimplified version of a CI/CD pipeline. And mind you, they are not similar to each other across all organizations. So CI/CD pipelines are made up of a combination of various components that work with each other to provide efficient integration and development. So on a high level, components used in a continuous integration, continuous deployment or delivery pipeline can be grouped into a few categories. So everything starts when a developer commits a code change to a repository. So popular repositories we come across are GitHub, SVN, and these tools provide versioning and source code management. So once a commit is made, we go to the build stage. The build servers are there, for example, Jenkins, and they will build the binaries from source code. So after the build is completed, a series of automated tests are run against the software, the build, to confirm if it is ready for deployment. So ideally, all these tests will be automated, but in practice, manual testing is also done. So once testing is done, the changes are deployed to the production or staging environments. So those are the basic building blocks. So let's take a look at what can go wrong at each stage on a high level. So software developers can write code containing vulnerabilities, credentials, or contain any other potential security issues. And they can use external vulnerable libraries downloaded from GitHub, which bring additional risks. So the other thing is, the organizations must be mindful of inside actors like privileged IT admins or former employees with access to source code and the ability to commit code without review. So Verizon breach investigation report in 2020 found out that 1/3 of the data breaches originate from inside actors. So threat actors inject malicious code into the development environment, and this is similar to the attack vector used in the very infamous SolarWinds breach in 2020 as well. So not only that, there are attacks at runtime. So once the code is built and tested, it is ready to be deployed. So when applications are actually running in staging or production environment, there is a whole lot of security issues and compliance issues that we might come across. So if I give an example in the container space, the container could be running with root privileges, or the container could be running a process which was not intended to run. And in infrastructure as a code, so you define the exact VM count, the aspects, and which ports should be open. So there can be a chance that this original configuration might change on the go due to some malicious activity. And that is what you call as infrastructure drift. So there are various security issues at each stage, and we need to look at what damage can it cause. So number one is the financial damage. So the cost of a bug goes up based on how far down the development life cycle the bug is found. And IBM System Science Institute says the remedy cost in live or production stages are up to 100 times higher than the remedy cost in development phase. And there will be other repercussions as well. So when you accommodate the code fix, it can cause changes to other artifacts as well. So I just want to give an example where a famous car manufacturing company learned it the hard way. So Toyota ended up recalling more than 9 million cars worldwide in 2010 due to certain vehicles reporting like unexpected acceleration. But it wasn't because of a mechanical issue. So these cars had a software bug that caused a delay in the anti-lock brake system. So there are many real life examples like this. So next thing is the loss in product sales revenue. So since user experience is damaged in the first place, so it is obvious that your products will not get the deserving attention from the target audience. Then the customer credibility is decreased by large extent and will cause huge reputation damage to the company. And there will be bad news and reviews all over social media, newspapers, and forums. So once all these things add up, so it reduces the productivity of the company as well. The teams will be busy fixing bugs or security issues rather than focusing on the next release. So, and the management will also be busy like firefighting that bad propaganda. So I hope by now you all are convinced that security should also be implemented as early as possible in the software development lifecycle. So right at the very beginning of every software project, you do have a requirement gathering phase. So this is true no matter what development method you use. So just like you have business analysts and product managers in these conversations, so there should be someone from security team as well. So there should be questions like, does this system contain PII data? Or does your application take user input? So what is the uptime requirement you need? So depending on the answers to these questions, the security team members can give his input to the design phase. So for example, if PII data is handled, we should encrypt them in transit, or we should use TLS, and we should encrypt while storing. Likewise, and if the application is taking user input, we should do user input validation. So remember, don't trust anything before you verify. So likewise, each stage, there is a role that we as security practitioners can play. So we should not wait till the end stages, where we usually do a vulnerability assessment or penetration testing and find out there's a SQL vulnerability or the application doesn't maintain sessions properly. So we should be proactive in this case, and by following the shift left security concept, we'll be able to course correct and reap out these benefits. So how do we incorporate security into our development pipelines? So the famous concept of people, process, and technology applies to this as well. So technology alone can't handle this. We need people to get involved, and we need the right processes and finally the right tools. So the major challenge in integrating security into development pipeline is the lack of security knowledge in these new areas. So even most of the universities, not only in Sri Lanka, across the globe, so do not offer like structured course modules or instructions on how to code securely. So how to reduce flaws in the code. And there is no formal learning path that we know of. So there is obviously a knowledge gap we need to fill in. So not only among developers, even most of the security teams do not have the right knowledge and the skill set around application security to tackle this problem. So usually we often come from infrastructure or network security backgrounds, and like it or not, applications will be the future, and many technologies, including security, will be built around it. So knowledge is the greatest tool available. So you should empower security and development teams in these areas. So in your company, you can conduct cross-team training sessions. So organize few workshops to share development knowledge with security team members and vice versa. Once that is underway, we can encourage self-learning methods. So there are many courses in popular e-learning platforms for few bucks, or you can get a company subscription. So reward those members who try to break away from their comfort zone and try to enhance their knowledge. And the next thing is the security champion programs. And that's another way to do it. So security champions do not need to be security professionals. So they are usually part of the development team, but with an interest towards secure coding and those who are willing to mentor other members on security best practices. So they can try to fix if there is an issue found out, or call in the security team to provide guidance. So the other method is we should make it everyone's job to make secure software. So security should be incorporated as a non-functional requirement for developers. So security teams should work to provide the tools and processes to satisfy those requirements in a developer-friendly manner. So ultimate responsibility lies with security practitioners, but it's the developers, the QA teams, and the operations teams that implement those. So the next thing is usually developers don't work with any solutions that take up unnecessary time. So for example, secret management solutions won't be well received by developers if they are going to be dependent on security teams to update the access policies or do the changes. So what's our solution for this? So we should use the self-service approach that gives developers the right weapons and the ammunition. And this will become a win-win for developers and the security folks as well. So once we get that freedom, or once we give that freedom to developers, they can integrate the tools themselves, and we as security practitioners can keep an eye on the alerts and look for ways to improve this process. So we do know that security should be fused into the process, but we don't have to do these checks and balances manually. So there are various security tools you can leverage in each stage of the development process. So many open source tools are available in this area, and commercial tools are also available. So starting with the coding phase, so there are tools that can be integrated into the developer ID itself. So it can detect issues and it can report them in the ID itself, so that the developer can fix them immediately. So once we once we finish the coding and we move on to the commit and the build stages, so we can make use of software composition analysis or static application security testing tools. So SCA tools are most effective in finding vulnerabilities in common and popular libraries, especially open source pieces. So they compare the list with a database of known vulnerabilities and give us the results. So the SAS tools can be considered as white box testing. So they look for defects in the non-compiled code, like for example, input validation, numerical errors, and race conditions, so on and so forth. So once the application is built and deployed for testing, tools like dynamic application security testing and interactive application security testing comes into the picture. So DAST is like a black box testing. So they examine a running web application from outside, simulate a real attack, just like a penetration, just like what you do in penetration testing. And these tools, these DAST tools normally can uncover authentication issues, memory leaks, and issues related to sessions as well. The biggest distinction is DAST tools can indicate the existence of a vulnerability, but since it can't access the code, it can't point out which piece of code has caused it. So next type of tools are the interactive application security testing tools. So it's a hybrid testing approach that basically solves the drawbacks of SAST and DAST by combining the best of both. So they work basically by deploying an agent or a sensor into the running application. So the role of these agents is to basically continuously monitor and analyze the application behavior during test or during operations. So IAS tools also analyze the entire code base of the application and can show exact location of a vulnerability. So that is not available in DAS because it cannot inspect the code. So after that, we have now coming to the running state of application. So RASP is a kind of tool that is integrated into the application and analyze ingress and egress traffic and end user behavioral patterns as well. So in some cases, these RASP tools are used in place of web application firewalls because unlike sitting in front, they sit right inside the application server. So important thing is we don't have a specific list of tools or products that should be bolted onto your pipeline. So first, you need to understand your environment and decide on the tools to pick. So I would suggest you speak with your colleagues in other companies or do an individual analysis on an open source tool. So if you have the spending power, go for a commercial solution so you don't have to worry about the support or continuity or the updates of that product. So finally, the process piece. So by now we have knowledge and we have people with right mindset, and we know a few tools out there as well. So now what's left is we need to introduce this to the process. So we need to have security checks at each appropriate stage of the CI/CD pipeline, and we should act upon the feedback of each security tool. So simplest example is if we include the dependency checks and third-party library scanning at build stage, and if those security checks fails, we need to go to the extent of stopping the build so that developers should correct them first and rerun the build. So we can practice this concept of secure automatically. So automate your test and processes as much as possible. So then you will have less risk of introducing security flaws due to human error. And your processes will be more consistent and predictable, and your tests will be efficient, and you can cover more lines of code as well. So again, understand the existing workflow, the CI/CD workflow of your company, and introduce these security checks into the process. So wrapping it up, if someone asks, where should I start my journey? Here's my list in order of priority. So start with education. So empower your teams, get the security teams to get a feeling of the development process, and development teams understand what security folks are trying to do. So all our efforts are to produce secure software. And once education is done right, so developers and security team can implement them on a small project. So maybe a non-critical one. Do a POC. So understand the capability of each tool and the value it brings to the table. So next thing is a cultural transformation. So this cannot be done overnight. So give it a little time. Slowly let people embrace the change. So make it part of their job to make secure software and make them care about security. So when you are in a mature state, I would say formalize what we have discussed, formalize the process and create policies and guidelines. So make it a must to build secure software without compromising the speed or the quality. So before I conclude, I want you to remember one thing. Security can be expensive, but not as expensive as not having security. So start securing your development pipelines, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malika. Do we have any questions? So if the participants have any questions, please post it on chat. We'll be checking Facebook and LinkedIn too. Facebook and YouTube too to check if participants have posted any questions. So thank you once again, Malika, Darren.
And I think,
Yeah.
Nilush, we're heading towards one last presentation, and right after that we have the quiz as usual. So we have improving threat detection with AI and ML, and that's Anubhav from a regional leader, cybersecurity solutions, Cisco, and then we have Inesh Fernando, SSCP, CISSP, Media Direct, Squared, Chapter Colombo. So we welcome you both, and over to you guys. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Darren. And just a quick audio check. Is my audio okay?
Perfect.
Yes.
We can hear you clear. Thank you.
Wonderful. While I request for the sharing rights for the presentation, I think I love the last remark that was made by the previous presenter, stating that security can be expensive, but it's better to have security rather than spending more time and money for the lack of it. So great thought there. I'll remember that for my next session. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and present here. And it's an honor to present along with Inesh, who's done a lot of great work specifically around threat detection using AI and ML. The subject we have today here is to talk about where does security analytics come into play when one has to apply it for threat detection. So that's our topic for the day. And what we're going to do is between Inesh and I, we're going to take close to about an hour and 15 minutes to walk you through exactly what role AI and ML has to play. Now, the agenda is very simple. We start with describing the need for analytics. We will go into details of the fundamentals. We're going to talk about the need for telemetry, what role it plays, what techniques can come into play, what are the outcomes we need to drive. We'll also get into details of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We'll bring out the perspective of what dark data is and how and where do you siphon out behavioral analytics from. And last but not the least, there is no security or there is no effective security if there is no effective outcome. So we're going to drive this towards a discussion on outcomes. Now, just to get this started, I'm sure all of us have experienced analytics in some shape or form in our daily lives. And I'm sure we've been using analytics for buying stuff online as well. What really matters with analytics is what's at stake. And let me take an example to illustrate this. I recently, and I've got this new hobby of going ahead and started cycling, and I realized that having a tail light on my cycle is a very, very important add-on to have. So I went searching for a tail light. I bought one, and then when I went back to Amazon, I see Amazon coming back and telling me many other things that would be of interest to me, which is good. It helped me. But what's interesting is that amongst all the things that I got to know of, I saw a couple of items which were not really useful to me. For example, the accuracy of the analytics was not really helpful. I see a recommendation to buy a treadmill. Now that's nowhere close to my interest. So the point I'm trying to make here is that yes, analytics can be helpful, but the precision around that analytics comes into play when you look at the overall perspective that you're trying to bring into being. And in this case, since it's just about going into a shopping site, it doesn't matter much. But if you go back and look at what role it has to play in the life of a security practitioner, the stakes are very high. And that brings up the explainability problem in front of us. Think of a scenario where analytics has played a role to come back and tell the security team that there is a potential compromise on the CEO's laptop. And everybody goes running, asking the CEO to disconnect from the network. We need their laptop to go back and do a cleanup activity, only to realize that it was a false alarm. That's quite a career-limiting move, if you agree with me. And that's where the importance of accuracy and precision comes into play when it comes to analytics in security. Now, why do we really need analytics? And I'm going to take the example of breaking the kill chain to illustrate that. We all know that attackers typically come into the environment using multiple techniques, and it's really a multi-stage compromise that they would try to look at. Now, all of us, and I'm taking an example here of a typical ransomware attack, which is trying to impact a Windows client through maybe an email or the need to go ahead and click a link online, which goes ahead and installs the attack or maybe causes the breach through a document that gets downloaded. And maybe taking an example of an emotet here, the emotet comes in, starts looking for areas where it could exploit, calls upon the trick bot, and the trick bot goes ahead and executes the attack. Now, if you observe here, there are multiple stages in this attack, and there are different point products that could be looking at protecting you. There could be products that are looking at phishing and spam. There are specific tools that are looking at whether the file is good or bad. There could be tools looking at command control callbacks. And then, of course, there could be specific tools looking at doing the cleanup activity. Now, the point here is these are multiple tools trying to protect you and giving you that sense of satisfaction that you've got tools here to protect you against these attacks. But there are scenarios where these tools fail. There are scenarios where these point products fail. And that's where we start looking at how the attackers typically use evasion techniques, obfuscation, creating confusion, and new tricks to go ahead and execute their attacks. And that's where one really has to go back and look at the role analytics has to play. We take yet another example. And I'll take the example of the recent Kaseya attack that happened somewhere in the time frame of June. And this is one attack where typically organizations which had a fairly decent architecture, very robust in terms of their posture, had the attack getting executed. And it brought forward the defense dilemma, where on one side, cyber hygiene tells you to go ahead and keep patching your critical software. And on the other side, the attack gets executed because you are trying to patch up an application that you trust. But unfortunately, the code itself was infected. And a typical supply chain attacks works like that. They will go ahead, try and identify a specific application that you trust, go ahead, infect the software code of that application, and when you download or rather patch it, the attack comes into the organization. And that's where one needs to recognize the need to look at what attackers typically do before executing their final attack. They are doing a lot of activities ranging from dumping credentials to moving laterally in your organization to going ahead and exfiltrating data to going ahead and communicating to callback servers. And the list goes on. This is just a very finite, very, very small list of activities that they do. And all this doesn't happen in a day. It's happening over a period of time, which gives you a lot of time to analyze two things. Number one, am I seeing something which I've never seen before? Am I seeing something which is a policy breach? So maybe we created a policy in the organization which did not allow sales employees to connect to the finance server. But here I'm seeing that a connection is established and there's an FTP going on with the finance server by a sales employee. So am I seeing stuff that should not be really seen? It's a policy breach. And yet another example to illustrate this is the example of the R-Eagle ransomware, which was used for the Kaseya attack. Now, attackers continuously change their techniques. The R-Eagle ransomware in the past rarely used DNS activity, but recently the reflections that we've seen indicate a high level of DNS activity happening when the R-Eagle ransomware executes itself. We've also seen this ransomware taking control of your system and executing the ransomware attack. And we just go ahead and have a look at what are the different activities it does. So it goes ahead, creates a mutex, which essentially means that multiple instances cannot run for the software. It establishes persistence, which ensures that if you were to reboot your laptop, you're not able to, the attack is active again. It goes ahead and tries to identify and kill processes and services which are meant to stop it from executing itself. And then it goes and deletes your backup to ensure that you have no way but to pay the ransomware. It may go ahead, change firewall rules, and if the attack is not so much around doing a ransomware attack, but more around getting control of your credentials so that it could exfiltrate data from your critical server, it would go ahead and use some tools to do credential dumping, get hold of credentials to your critical servers, and start attacking those servers and start exfiltrating data. Now, the point is, in all these activities, there could be many actions or many activities going on, conducting on your network, which you could get a hold of, provided you had some best practices in place, which could give you early indicators of unauthorized changes on your endpoints, unexpected use of your credentials, or any kind of unusual activities that could give you some kind of a precursor to the attack happening. And this becomes an extremely essential part of your threat hunting exercises. Now, let's go back to the question where we started. Where does analytics play a role? Because we've understood that this goes beyond just having a point solution trying to go ahead and catch a malware. This is about a series of activities that have happened, which you would probably need to catch early in their life cycle. And that's where the fundamentals come in of where does behavioral analytics, where does security analytics play a role? Now, this first understands fundamentally how does it differentiate itself from signatures. Signatures were basically designed to ensure that if a pattern was seen, one has to sound an alarm. But unfortunately, the attackers know what pattern you're looking for. So it goes against the whole concept of going ahead and catching these attacks basis signatures. The other aspect is the precision. And this goes back to the example of the tail light I bought from Amazon. At the end of the day, this analytics has to have an outcome which makes sense to any one of these personas that I'm sharing on the screen. How does it solve a problem for an incident responder or a security analytics or a security operations person or somebody who's a part of a compliance and a policy team? The reason I'm saying this is if analytics is just another piece of information for you and it doesn't really solve a problem that these personas face day in and day out, it's yet another alert fatigue issue for them. So you could go back and start the need to defining analytics with an outcome in mind. And the outcome is what problem on a daily basis or an hourly basis or on a weekly basis is required to be solved for these personas. That's part number one. Part number two is where do you source the information to exercise your analytics from? And that brings in the important aspect of telemetry. Telemetry is any change in information that you need to catch and baseline to ensure if there's any deviation or an outlier on it. And to illustrate that, let me take an example of your going ahead and doing a basic activity such as tracking users' behavior. So basically, a lot of us have these access logs that we typically capture and we feel good about it. But the point is, how do you go beyond that? Because this is no longer about a situation where a user whom you trust in the organization is breaking into your network. In this scenario, the user whom you trust is possibly logging into the network and demonstrating activities which are malicious in nature. So can we go beyond looking at just the log to check whether the person has accessed the system to going ahead and understanding what protocols were used? Are they really sitting behind another machine through RTB? How much data are they exchanging? Was this communication encrypted? And what other sessions were active at the same time? And is the device that they're using posture compliant with that of the organization? That's one. Now, the question that most of us really get on our mind is, what did we do before machine learning took scale? Clearly, there were many other techniques that could solve this problem to go beyond signatures. One was simple pattern matching, which is going back and looking at specific patterns and zeroing in on what is an outlier to what you generally see. Or it could be statistical methods where you use averages, min and mean. All you need to do is collect a data set and start defining your baseline and run statistical methods to see what is normal in the distribution list and what deviates from it. Or you could use something as simple and straightforward as first order logic, which typically brings out the importance of understanding the relationship between the set. For example, you've got a server which is very critical to you. The server basically talks to another server which is used as a database for that particular server which is running the application. This is one scenario. The scenario set 2 is you've got a user who's potentially demonstrating an indication of compromise. So first order logic says that if this person who's using this computer which is indicating a compromise tries to connect to one of your critical servers, there's a high likelihood of an attack being executed on your particular application. So that's where you could use first order logic. Now, machine learning can be used in tandem with all these techniques. What we do need to recognize is if the domain that we're running all this on is static, it's easy to use the traditional methods. But if you're looking at more data, larger data sets, that's where you go beyond human scale, because in today's world, we're talking about security, which becomes dynamic. There's a lot of variation to it. And that's where you need to bring in machines to bring it and make it go beyond human scale and get machine scale into it. Now, the second thing we need to understand is where does all this fit in? What are the different kinds of learnings that come into picture? And of course, my colleague Inesh is going to talk more about the artificial intelligence around it, but I'm going to double click on what are the different learning techniques that come into being when you use machine learning. And predominantly, there are 3 that come into picture. One is a simple technique called the supervised learning. And this is where I think most of us have seen when we use Google Photos today. Google would typically ask you a question saying, is this you? And you say, yes, this is me. Now, that's a pattern that's established. If I am seen on any other photograph, all I have to do is ask the right competency question, which is this you? And all you have to say is yes. And that's an example of supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is predominantly used in retail, where the entire data set is far less structured and it continuously is and you don't really have answers to a lot of questions. So it continuously starts learning and starts making a relationship between the data sets. Very, very prominent in retail. The third example is a trial and error method called the reinforced learning, where for that data sets, a set of questions are asked, and depending upon the questions being right or wrong, the learning evolves. Now, what we need to understand is which part of this learning algorithm is going to be used in your AI and in your ML that you're going to apply from a security analytics perspective. The other thing that we need to be cognizant of is the fact that encryption is the name of the game today. We all know most of our network traffic today is encrypted, which is good from a privacy perspective, but it is bad because threat actors are also going to leverage the fact that this data is encrypted, and any underlying tools that you're going to use in between may not be able to catch the malicious code sitting in those packets because it's encrypted data. Now the question is, if all of this is encrypted, how do you run analytics on it? Do you decrypt it and run analytics? Well, the answer is no. The fact is that all data which you see encrypted today started at a stage at an unencrypted stage. And in that data, there are headers which can be used efficiently to make sense from an analytics perspective. And that's where TLS comes into picture. TLS being a very, very strong component today, which could be used to infer a lot in terms of analytics on the data that we see on the networks today. So this really moves us away from using direct inspection to an inference-based model to establish whether what we see is normal or not normal, is it malicious or clean. Now let's understand how do you use this unencrypted data in this encrypted world to make sense of it. And to explain that, let me bring you the concept of fingerprinting. Why do we need it? Well, if you need to go back and establish whether a behavior is good or bad, you first need to know who is demonstrating that behavior. So classification of the asset becomes an extremely important step in all of this. Now to do that, What we need to do is we need to find a unique parameter basis which you can identify something. And that's where fingerprinting comes into picture. What is a fingerprint? In normal life, in our day-to-day life as a human being, a fingerprint is an impression that our finger leaves. And the beauty of this impression is it's unique, it's fairly detailed, it is very difficult to alter, and it's got a very high life cycle. So it's durable over the life of the person. Applied back into the digital world, if you can get similar fingerprints for objects within your network, you can get a very high degree of inference. You can cover a lot in terms of assets. And the only challenge that you need to overcome is it being labor intensive, because if you really need to fingerprint everything, it's going to take time. So you really need to determine what is the overall data set that you want to go back and look at fingerprinting on. And to explain this, take an example of a digital network fingerprint. You look for specific objects which you want to go ahead and fingerprint. For example, and just to illustrate that here, let's take an example of a duck, right? Duck being the overall object that we are trying to fingerprint. Now, what are the observables on a duck? A duck typically has feathers, it has webbed feet, it's known to have a yellow bill. And if you see any kind of these observables on your data, you can go back and clearly say, yes, it's a duck. What you can't tell is whether this duck is Daffy Duck or not. So that's where you typically start. You're not able to reach the instance yet, but you're clearly able to classify it as an object. Now, once you've been able to classify the asset, you move towards understanding what are the normal behaviors to expect from the duck. And that is where the importance of behavioral telemetry comes into picture, because the network is where your endpoints are going to behave. Anything and everything from a behavior perspective can be caught on the net flow by taking a look at the net flow records or spanning traffic. So let's try to understand what are these different behavioral profiles. And I'll take you back to the example of the duck. Now, what are the known profiles of a duck's behavior? It quacks, it waddles, it eats grass and insects. Yes, it can fly, and there are a few other behaviors. I would be surprised if I heard the duck roar. So now that you've got a data set which can classify or profile behaviors of a duck, it's easy to profile what are not, or eliminate what is not a duck's behavior, and that's roaring. And that's where, if you go back now, from the time of classification of the asset to understanding the behavior, you're able to start finding outliers in the network using these fingerprinting techniques. So taking it back to the world of IT, consider that there's an observable 232 which attributes to a process, and that process clearly gives you the confidence that this process is coming out from a printer. Now, if you see behavior profiles around clients connecting to the printer, or there's a traffic with a particular pattern going around, what would typically happen when you're firing a print command onto a printer, you should be okay with it. You should be surprised if you see a connection from this printer towards AWS or any other activity which does not profile with what a typical printer has to illustrate. And that's where you're able to bring out examples of behavior-based dispositions around your network. So a quick summary of what this analytical pipeline really means. In the world of security analytics, what you need to essentially do is do fingerprinting to classify your assets. And once you've done that, you're able to categorize using behavioral modeling what are typical behaviors to expect from that asset. And once you've done that, if you start seeing now, or if you start monitoring the pattern of traffic, what kind of volumes of traffic is being exchanged, is there a particular protocol being used, based on that behavior analytics, you can come back and tell whether this is normal behavior or abnormal behavior. And over a period of time, you can start baselining it. Now, how does this move the future? We've clearly understood that going forward, dark data is going to exist. There's going to be a lot of encrypted data for you to run your analytics on. What you need to start with is siphon out the threat activity. Now, that is the known bad. It's a small subset of the overall data that you're looking at. So siphon out the known bad. Your challenge comes in when you look at the normal activity And in that normal activity is supposed to bring out the weird stuff. Now, what is the weird stuff? This is the weird stuff where a trusted printer in the organization today is trying to talk to AWS, or a machine which has close to about 10 different browsers sitting on it, trying to do 10 different activities. That's not normal activity. So you've got to basically classify the observables into where they are originating from, look at what's the normal activity, and siphon out the abnormal activity. Now, and that will start with, as I said, classification of the data assets, labeling them, and then ensuring that the printers act like printers. A vulnerability scanner should act like a scanner, and you should not go back and detect a vulnerability scanner as somebody who's doing malicious activity because it was designed to do so, rather not create those false alarms. And if your printer is now acting or behaving like a vulnerability scanner, you have a problem and you need to investigate. And that is where it goes back to drawing conclusions, or rather having those right competency questions asked, which contribute back to what a typical persona, be it a threat analyzer or a researcher or a SecOps person, what are those conclusions or what are those answers those people are looking for. And for us to get that, we need to perform analysis by doing what is typically called an entity modeling to understand which entity demonstrates what behavior and where does it deviate from it. And there could be an analytical pipeline that could come in from multiple sources for us to run this analytics. It could be from IP metadata, it could be from system logs, it could be from DNS entries, it could be from vulnerability scans, config changes, and so on and so forth. Or it could be external intel as well. So that brings me to the end of what I had to talk about, from establishing the need for machine learning and analytics for better threat detection. And this paves the way for me to ask a question to my friend and colleague Inesh, who is now going to talk about his project, which he has leveraged recently to use analytics and solve a business problem. So Inesh, if you're there, I'm stopping to share. Could you walk us through your project on how you've been able to achieve an analytical outcome with your research? What do you need?
Thanks, Anubhav. Thanks a lot for the great session, Anubhav. So, can I have the sharing content, please?
Inish, give us a minute. We're working on it.
Sure.
You should be able to share now.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, Anish.
Hi, Inish. Yes, we can see your screen.
Sure. Just hold on.
Rob, we can't hear you very well, though.
Is it clear now?
There's a slight, it's not very clear. Inish, shall we try again? Maybe we'll share and then. Oh,
Sure. Is it clear now? Oh.
quite. Inish, that's fine. Let's go ahead and we'll see how it goes. That's
Sure. Let me share my screen.
So Anish, while you're sharing your screen, I'm repeating the question to you. I'm handing over to your point where we want to see what analytical outcome did you drive with the project that you did with security analytics.
Sure, Anubhav, definitely. So I'm going to discuss about the analytical objectives like related to AI and ML. So what we have did during this project. So first of all, let me take you through the topic, right? So why we need AI and ML related to these investigations, what we are doing, or threat hunting, or in related to security operations, what we handle day to day. So why we need this, and then what is the reason behind this? So this is your enterprise transformation throughout these years. What you have seen for the past decade, your enterprise is almost moving towards the cloud, and then you have multiple options on, like you are using SaaS applications on the SaaS adoptions like O365 or other SaaS applications, and it might be your cloud technology. So you're moving gradually from your identities to your cloud, right? So with this new normal, with the pandemic situation, your identities are dispersed everywhere in the globe. So where are you going to protect your perimeter? Do you have a defined perimeter right now? And then how do you protect it? So that is one of the critical things that you have. Apart from that, you have your infrastructure like IoT, IoET, those kind of infrastructure also get into play. And it's also connected to your network. And then it might be in your separate network, but it's always going through your network. So how do you protect your identities with these scenarios, right? So that is the most important thing that we need to highlight with AI and ML technology, how we get involved with these kind of technologies to give a better outcome, right? Let's move on. So how do we protect our new perimeter? So since our perimeter, we cannot define our perimeter right now because our users are everywhere, work from home, work from anywhere. So how do we define? Do we have a threat intel, the traditional threat intels, what we have previously using our SIMs or SOAR environment, is it effective right now? And if we have an anomaly kind of a detection, let's say you baseline your network and then you baseline your architecture, and if you identify an anomaly within that, is there a mechanism to identify that anomaly? And then rather than wasting the times of the analyst, is there a mechanism that you can say, okay, this might be a true positive with my previous knowledge on my search, my threat engines that I have. So if that kind of a portfolio, if you can pitch, so that will be a great opportunity for the for reduce the alert fatigue and then the effort of the alert investigators as well. So how do we get into this space from protecting this new perimeter, right? You have your partners.
Just a question here.
Yeah,
just a question here. At what point in time does this approach of protecting this new perimeter really transition from the traditional approach to the approach that you're talking about? Because most of us do recognize that, yes, there's a change required to protect the new perimeter, but how does the deviation happen or the transition happen to the new approach that you're talking about?
Yes, let me explain on that, Anubhav. So now the traditional monitoring systems, what we have, we always use our normal traditional logs and we use our telemetries and then we put it into a central monitoring system and then we analyze all these things. But currently, the users are not in a central location, that users are not in your perimeter to see. And then these users are around the globe. And how and what are the mechanisms that you're going to use to capture these kind of a data and predict who will be your most high risk user for your environment? So at that predictions, how do you going to do those predictions? That is the most important thing. So that's how we are going to pitch in this, and how do we going to do that, right? So that is the most important question. These traditional architectures won't long at a given point in time, but you have to gradually move into a different pace altogether. Because if you analyze all these network logs and threat intelligence, they are giving you multiple things with the security analyst, a lot of information, right? A lot of front-end reports and everything, which you cannot identify you cannot prioritize them as well. So when you sit into security operations center, it is very hard to identify what is the most important alert, who will I prioritize, and what will I do. So at that, so this kind of a mechanism using AI and ML, this kind of approach, far more useful for the analyst as well as the SOC engineers to identify whom should I give the most priority at that point in time. So that's where this new technology on AI and ML, the research what we have done, is come into play, right? So why we need this kind of a next generation SIM and a SOAR kind of a platform? So SIM or a SOAR platform, why do we need it? A next gen one? Why? What is the reason, right? So the scale of the cloud, it's drastically scaling in a huge exponential manner, and then your limits are now become limitless, and then your workloads are moving into cloud as well. So almost most of the critical workloads are in cloud, and then you have to have a computation power to see all these telemetries and then these correlations in between logs. And your cloud workloads has to be protected in some way, and then you have to have a mechanism to identify these workloads, telemetries, and then these anomalies. And is there an easy way to integrate this, or do you have to do the custom log parsers, and then you have to code, and then you have to go for a very tedious task to do the integrations for this? Or do you have simple APIs that you can integrate with these new next generation SIM or SOAR platforms, which can give you more collective effort, and then the more advanced detection responsibilities, and then these investigations in a more prominent manner? Right? How do we use AI for this, right? But most of the time we talk about machine learning, but we talk about artificial intelligence as well, but we do not describe it in a detailed manner. Why do we need artificial intelligence? And then if we can develop a neuron, so the concept starts with a neuron. So if we develop a neuron and then gives the knowledge based on the previous attack types or previous anomalies what we have, and then if the neuron can identify, okay, this according to the previous knowledge of mine, okay, this might be an alert related to a specific targeted attack. Right? This kind of a mechanism, if you can build into an agent, so that becomes an AI which builds their own knowledge base, and then which can act upon to that particular knowledge that they have. So that's where the AI comes into play for the security operation teams. And let's say how the AI comes, and then what AI do right now within the environment which we have, the next generation SOC. So in the next generation security operation centers, how they operate in the form of threat hunting, identifying these anomalies, how do they make the difference, right? They have these pre-built machine learning models that you can try out, and then you can train them also. By training them, you have your accuracies or your hyperparameters which you can tune, right? And then the correlation rules. They have their own correlation rules which they can build by the machine learning algorithms, and then they can fine-tune these correlation algorithms based on your findings of the AI and ML models that you have built, right? So, and then you can
Ladies and gentlemen, I think Inesh is having a few technical issues, so please bear with us.
using your threat intelligence, you can take the actions based upon them, right? Let's see a use case, what we can do for identification of these kind of mechanisms, right? So this is a simple risk-based session control, what we see based on the previous knowledge, what we have gained using machine learning techniques. Right? So you have a user, let's say Inesh Fernando is a user. So user is accessing through a device, which device is not managed, and you don't know the behavior of that particular device because it is unmanaged for your you don't know about, it is not registered on your domain, so it is unmanaged. And then this user is trying to access a particular document in this Dropbox application, and then he wants to access it or download it, right? So access and download. So based on the risk identification on the AAA service, let's say we define the AAA service. In this AAA service, we define the conditional access policies, where the user is accessing through a known platform. A user, the configuration is like managed, or where the last seen location for that particular user. Is it a high risk location? Is it a normal location which we can categorize as low risk? Right? So these considerations are well considered, and then based upon these sessions on the previous knowledge, so they know, okay, this user is generally accessing from New Jersey, and he's using this unmanaged device to access this Dropbox application. Based on that, it will give you to access this particular document, or you can download it. But if you identify this as a unmanaged device and it's a high risk, then it will block here based on the previous knowledge that you have. So that is a particular use case related to these AI and ML technology, which you can use to control these kind of activities. Let's see what we can do next, right? So the challenges what we face during these kind of activities, we face many of the challenges during these operations, right? So what are the challenges what we face during this kind of a process? So actors are using increasingly very sophisticated attacks. So these AI and ML engines has to be trained based on these sophisticated attacks, which you might be the patient zero, but you have to gain knowledge in terms of, if you want to have the protection from these AI and ML models, you have to gain knowledge, and then you have to feed the knowledge to them. Then only they can act upon their knowledge. So, and the next point, the digital estate, I mean, these days, your presence is in everywhere because you can connect from everywhere, and then your new identities can authenticate through the internet. It's not only the typical authentication like Kerberos or NTLM. Now we're using internet-based authentication. So at that point in time, how do you going to protect these kind of activities of these users, your user identities? How are you going to protect it? And your threat intelligence, how much you're going to invest for this threat intelligence, and then how are you going to build correlation in between all these technologies? That might be a huge problem for you on this long run. Let's take an attack triage for a particular user, a user called Mike Brandon. So let's see how these AI and ML technologies, which combines based on the models that we build, how these AI and ML technologies come into play to protect your users and identify these anomalies. So this user, we get the first alert as an Mike Brandon is trying to access particular location, and then it's identified as malicious. So when we drill down this malicious activity, it's trying to access your network using this particular IP address, which is a little bit suspicious. But if you see the reputation for this IP address, based on the threat intelligence, it might be bad. So you identify there's a bad IOC, which is trying to, so your first indication of compromise. So you see there's a particular activity which is trying to attempt from this particular IP address, which is related to Mike Brandon. And if you dig more further, you can see Mike Brandon has access for this particular machine as well. So this is another machine that you are trying to access for your network. So he has it might be a jump host kind of an environment. And what is the particular activity that Mike Brandon has done? And then it's identified from your machine learning models that you have built. So it's a suspicious PowerShell script that Mike Brandon has experimented on this machine. And the machine he used to experiment this is this particular EU primary DC. So that is a PowerShell script that he's going to use. So that's why it identifies Mike Brandon is a high-risk user due to this attack triage. Let's take the same problem. What is the problem here? And then how do we address this problem statement, right? So you have a classified user like Mike Brandon. Do you have a classification? That's the first question. So my colleague Anubhav explained about the identification of assets. So do you really identify all these assets within your company? So within your network or within your asset list, right? So do you identify the user like Mike Brandon, as the previous example, is accessing from a device which is high risk or low risk based on the identification from your ML engine, and then is trying to access for a particular information which is classified as internal or restricted, or specific classification is there. So your user has a classification, so your device has a classification, and your information has a specific classification, right? So is this by seeing only this particular incident, you might not see this, you cannot identify it's a priority 1 alert or 2 or 3, but you need to identify the other investigations, other evidence to see whether this user's behavior is it malicious or is it good or is it unknown? What is the status right now? So that is the most important thing that we need to see. So you can see we have to do user behavior analytics based on the ML engines that we build. So for that, we use DNS reputation. So we see all the DNS requests, what user is trying to access based on the DNS patterns that they use. And based on that, we see, okay, this user's DNS behavior, the past DNS behavior is slightly more confusing, or it might be high risk to that particular pattern that he accessed. So based on the identifications, and we get the threat intel feeds, and then we see what is the reputation that they give from the threat intel. Is it high risk kind of application that he can do access on the destination? So based on that, we prioritize these particular alerts into segments like priority 1, priority 2, 3, or 4. Based on that, we give a priority for this particular user. This might be a high risk user based on the predictions that we have on the ML engine. So you have to give alert, you have to give priority based on this. So what is the gap that we identify during this research? So collection of DNS data, which be a tedious task because users are dispersed everywhere, and then you have to collect this DNS information from the users. And it's a very hectic task because users are moving here and there. It's not from only from your perimeter or only from your network. So how do you run the machine learning algorithms based on this? Do you have a plug and play model which you can build, and then you can plug and then you can get the results out, right? For any corporate or any industry or any environment. How do you protect your personally identifiable information of these users? Because you see a lot of patterns of the search patterns and everything for these particular users based on your DNS queries. So what will be the void in this research? So predicting the near likelihood prediction is a void that we have identified from the past research, and near real-time threat detection is the void that we have seen. And the location dependency is a void because the DNS, most companies are more contained on a particular location-based DNS, which is not agile. So it is very hectic to identify the location dependencies. And then you have the IP dependencies based on the DHCP addressing schema, because IPs are leasing time to time. So one user, like the previous mentioned user, get an IP address, and then that particular user getting another IP address within a couple of minutes, or a couple of hours. So when your next search cycle, you will have to correlate all this information, which will be a hectic task for your engine, right? So these are the things that you have to identify during this research, and then the address on these particular void areas. So first, on the DNS collection, we deploy an agent to identify the user DNS traffic irrespective of the location, and then we pumped into a particular storage account. And from that storage account, we use the Databricks infrastructure to do the machine learning algorithms to run on that and then do the predictions for us. So this is a machine learning tier that we have used. So it directly integrates with Azure Databricks on the Python notebooks. So we developed on top of Python notebooks. So, and then we use the storage as Azure storage for this. So,
Right, so I have a question here now, Inish, for you. You very beautifully talked about the data collection tier. You talked about the machine collection tier. Very clear now that you had an analytical pipeline, which you picked up from various sources, and analytics on it, basis which there are certain outcomes that we were looking for. Basically, certain competency questions that we were looking at answering. How do you look at the accuracy of these results? Again, taking you back to the bicycle tail light that I bought about 10 days back, was being forced to look at a treadmill as well, which clearly is not something I'm looking for. And also the example I took of how we don't want the CFO or the CEO's laptop to be removed from the network because we believe that it's infected, which actually is not. So how do you go back and measure the accuracy of the work that you've done in terms of consolidating the pipeline, running analytics on it, and then building those outcomes?
Sure, Anubhav. So let me show on that. So that's a very valid question. So what will be the model accuracy? So that's a interesting question. So that is the most important thing. The true positive rate, false positive, true negatives, false negatives. So for models, we use 4 supervised learning models and 2 unsupervised learning models for this particular project. And on that, the model accuracy is over 90% for the supervised learning, all the 4 supervised learning models. And for unsupervised learning models, we have nearly 50% of accuracy. If we increase the size of the data, we currently tested for nearly 450 GB of data for a particular 1 month of period, 30 days of period. So if we increase more and more, so unsupervised learning, we hope to increase the accuracy of the model accuracies on the unsupervised learning. But for supervised learning, we hit more than 90% of the accuracy for the 4 supervised learning models that we have identified and then we implemented. So on the intelligence, so we use Cisco Talos threat intel feeds to baseline our measurements. So once we say it is harmful or it is high risk, those kind of things. So we identify based on, we baseline our measurements against the Cisco Talos with what Cisco Talos is selling. That is the threat intel what we have identified and then we applied on this project. And for the hosting, we use Azure Databricks cloud platform to host these all architectures. So host this particular infrastructure and to host these live models on Azure. So that's what we use during this research project. So I think we can conclude from here. So that's it from my end.
This would be a good time to take questions as well if they're coming in on the chat.
Sure.
Please do posting your questions. Alan, do let us know if there are any questions that we need to answer. We're just looking at the Q&A panel.
Nelushi, is there any questions that we can see or?
Nothing on this. We'll be checking on Facebook and YouTube as well. Just give us a few moments, Inish.
Sure.
Give us a few minutes. Inish, looks like we're good to go. No questions. So I think they've understood all that you all have had to say. And so, guys, thank you very much, Inish, for joining us. And
Anubhav, thank you. It's been a great session. So we thank you guys for coming on board. We hope that this has been useful to our participants and they're still there. So with that, let's move into our final session. That is a quiz. So we're going to have.
So before we move on to the session, I know you're all tired. So why don't we take a 5-minute refresher? I'm not going to call it a break, but a refresher. And we'll see you all.
But at the same time, we'll try and share you the link. So all of you connect to the link that will be given to you, all of you, so that so when everyone is on the platform, we could start it. So right now, the link will be shared to all of you on the platform. So please join in quickly as soon as possible. Thank you.
And guys, just to recap, the top 3 winners would get 3 full scholarships for the network cyber security course, as well as the exam voucher. So with that, we'll break for 5 minutes. We'll send you all the link that you'll need to use to join the platform, as well as the credentials. Please ensure that you all have logged in within the time frame so that we
Thank you, Dallin. Thank you very much. We'll be dropping off. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dylan. Thanks, Nilushi. We are dropping off.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anish.
Right, guys, the link is shared on your shared on the WebEx platform. So we're just going to finish it soon. I know it's 5 o'clock, but still we want to give away those three
Yes.
certificates, the exam voucher and the course. Yeah, so please join in quickly. The information is shared. Right, we have shared the site, the platform and the passcode as well. So please log in, get into the platform as soon as possible, and we will start with the quiz as soon as possible. So please, we request everyone, those who are interested in being part of the quiz, please join the platform as soon as possible. Thank you. So we've got around 15 people who have joined. Yes, there is. That's good. So Kevin, if you could share the screen, that would be great. And yes, people are joining in. So guys, joining quickly as possible. Have 59 people who have joined the session. Right. Do we have anyone else to join in? So we kindly request anyone interested in to join in as soon as possible. So we'll give another two minutes, Nilushi?
2 minutes, yeah, sounds good.
Right, since it's 5 past. So we'll give you 2 more minutes to join into the platform. If you have any difficulties, do let us know as soon as possible. So we've got 62 on board at the moment. But we have 74, and Nilusha, I still see people joining in. We don't want any disappointment, so please join in quickly. We
So
cannot.
guys, let's balance, shall we?
I think we need to define on a time. We
Yes.
said 2 minutes, but it's so. Let's give another 2 more minutes.
So guys, 5:08 is the deadline. Please join beforehand if you all are encountering any technical issues. Drop a message on chat. Okay, we got a message saying waste. So there's a message being sent saying he can't join. Can you tell us what exactly the issue is so that we can help you? That
So, guys, if you have any problems, let us know. Yes, Nilusha.
here, the participants join the
Yeah.
platform.
We have. Yes. So, can we invite Sujit Christie? Thanks for coming in, Sujit. Can you hear us? Yes. Permissions have been given.
Yep, great to be here.
Thank you, Sujit, for coming in.
Thank you, Dayalan. Thank you, Nilushi, for the invite. So while people are joining, we'll probably take this time to say a big thank you. I have a long list of people to thank. So I probably go through the list. I've actually got them here. So first and foremost, I would like to thank the board of Sri Lanka CERT, right? And I want to thank each and every one of the board members, the chairman. I also want to thank the CEO of Sri Lanka CERT, Mr. Jayasiri. And of course, the team, which was behind the scene working very, very hard, right? And I mean, all of us see only two faces, that's Nilushi and Dayalan. But then I know that there's a huge team which is working behind the scene to put this program together. A big thank you to you. And also, I want to thank the speakers, each and every one of you, who actually took a lot of effort. It's last minute, but still, you all chipped in and did your best, and I think it has been well received. Thank you all, and thank you very much for making very meaningful presentations, which I personally gained a lot out of it, and I was in a couple of them, and it was very, very enriching. So thank you all for all the speakers. Last not but the least, I also want to thank my own board, IC² Colombo Chapter Board, and thank you for the support. Thank you for anchoring. I know during the session, my team was involved in coordinating, ensuring that people were there on time and managing all the internal logistics. Thank you so much for doing it. And I also want to thank ISACA Sri Lanka chapter for coming in, chipping in with your participation. So thank you again, Prashantan, for lending a hand to make this event a success. So once again, thank you very much for this great event. Thank you for inviting IC² Colombo chapter to be part of this initiative. We look forward to being a part of this event going forward in the future. Dal, Nilushi, over to you.
Thank you, Sujesh, for your kind words. We are indeed proud to have you on board. And it has certainly been a mini conference just today. We've had around 8 to 9 presentations with different topics. And we've seen participants being and listening to all the panelists, which has been amazing. We've not seen a drop in the number of participants. And till late evening, we've had over 130 attendees, so which is a very good thing.
Up to about 200 at
and
one point.
So everything is recorded. If you missed it, it's there on Facebook, it's there on YouTube channel. And
I also want to just break in, and I forgot to thank the sponsors who came in to give away these awesome awards for the participants for the quiz. Cisco Academy. I want to mention about them, and there are other sponsors. But I also want to mention about another sponsor. He's a sponsor for you, but he actually helped us do some artwork for us in terms of the mailers and all those things. A special thank you to Inosh from Articulate, and for the good work he did yesterday night. In a rapid time, he got some of the the banners out for us to get it mailed across. Thank you, Inosh and Articulate team. Back to you, Dayalan.
So Jeff, certainly we are thankful for Ashok and his team for coming on board and giving us a lovely platform that has made our life easier. On top of that, even the quiz, we were able to do this without having another platform. Certainly, they've given away 6 vouchers with exam course as well, so which is very good. So 3 were distributed in the afternoon, and the rest 3 will be given during this session. So I think we've got 87 people, and still people are coming in, but we've certainly given enough time. So I think it's 10 past, 11 past. So let's begin. Let's begin with the quiz. So you've got 10 questions. Again, it's to do with accuracy and speed. So let's just keep that in mind. You can be accurate, but if you're late, I'm sorry, you will not be able to win the game. So it's to do with accuracy. You've got to balance and being with the speed. So thank you. So let's begin with the quiz. So we've got 44% of people who've got it. Have said that it's tempered glass, but let's wait for the answer. So I think 19 of them have got it right. So let's move on to the second question. So again, we've got majority of them saying it's administrators, but the answer is users. Sometimes the questions are very tricky, Nilushi. It's just that you got to understand them well.
I think given the time limitation, it's a bit tricky. But we'll see how it goes. 5 seconds left.
And again,
We'll see what the answer is.
the answer is guidelines. So let's move on. Fourth question.
So we have 45% of our audience who says it's B, but let's see what the answer is. Offers defense in depth superior to a concentric layers. Move on to the next question.
Right, we've done with so majority of the answer is non-repudiation. Okay, so I think we have we could see the scores probably now since we've hit 5. Let's see where they stand.
5, we've got.
Right, it's very difficult for us to read from here, but certainly we see.
We've got Hasan there.
Can you read the rest? Right, okay, but we certainly see people close by. So what we want to tell you
I
is
see a familiar name also. Dinesh is also on the scoreboard.
Right, okay.
So we'll see.
Right, but we've got, what we want to tell them is we've got 10 more questions. So you still got an opportunity, even if you're at the back, to come forward. Right, okay, let's begin.
See. So 46% say it's cybersecurity capabilities. Let's see what the answer is. It's core business function.
So you've got 9 more
Questions
questions.
are very tricky.
Very, very tricky.
It's a test of endurance and test of knowledge, test of experience, expertise.
So most of you all have gone with D, identify vulnerabilities and threats to the business function. But the answer is C.
And I think majority of them have gone with technical risk. But let's look at the answer. So 3 answers, yes. Okay. Let's move on.
This is a good one.
So again, I think 32% of them. Let's look at the answer. And
That's a very tricky one. I think we need to give them a prize just for that.
okay, 8C. Right, we've got 6 more questions, so let's move on.
After this.
Right, I think it's time that we look at the scores.
We need to get the answer for this.
I think most of them have it's right. So yeah, let's see where they stand. And
We have Rohana here.
okay, interesting.
Yes, then we have Ashan.
Right, so we've got new names that
New
have come
names,
up.
definitely.
Yeah. So what we want, you still got a chance.
Still got a chance.
Because we look at the time plus the accuracy. So
Exactly.
you've got 5 more questions. Do your best.
And we'll see how it goes.
Always it's good to try. Thank you. Let's
move on.
proceed. And I think majority of them say it's A, but
And A it is.
it is.
Let's move on to the next question. Another tricky one.
And it's certainly difficult at this moment of time. I know. They've been exhausted. We're giving them
It's
away.
been a long day.
I know. So it's, but yes, I think majority of them have said B, but let's look at the answer.
No, not bad at all.
That's right. So we've got 3 more. Let's do it. Don't give up.
Responsibility for the governance of the IT should rest with.
Okay. Majority of them say it's A.
Have a look at the answer.
And it's
For
B.
it.
Okay, so we've last 2 questions. Let's go ahead.
Keyword being first, guys.
And I think majority of them says it's D. But the answer. Last and final question for the day. And we would announce the winners. Okay, and majority of them. And that brings us to the end of the quiz.
And it is it.
And so let's look at let's see who the winners are. Okay,
Ashan Hevagama.
okay. So Ashan Hevagama, can we kindly request you to switch on your camera and your mic? And I think you've given permission to do so. And then we have
Nadishan Kanangara. Nadishan Kanangara, second place. And we have Hasan Anushanga, yeah, in third place.
I think you're given permission to switch on your camera. Thank you. Right. So we've got 3 people. Pasan, we're waiting for you.
Is Pasan here as well?
Pasan, are you there?
So Ashan and
Ashan, are you there?
Ashan's
Right,
here.
Ashan is there. And then the other
Nadishan's
person.
here as well.
Right.
So is Pasan. Brilliant.
It's nice. Let's quickly take a photo of all of us, if that's okay by you all.
You can see them adjusting.
Pasan,
Sun disappeared.
Pasan. Right, okay. Right, congratulations. And
Guys, you all have won 3 vouchers. courtesy of Cisco Networking Academy. This is on network security. So we'll be contacting you. I think we have your email addresses. So we'll be getting in touch with you to see as to how we can give it away.
So some of our hosts
Congratulations
will
again.
get in touch with you to get this information, but thank you and well done. So that brings us to the end of our workshop, which was done in collaboration with IC². So thank you, Sujit, once more, Sujit and the team for coming forward and putting up this wonderful program. It just looked like a mini conference today. And we also want to remind you that we have the conference starting on, which kicks off at 9 a.m. So we've got, again, various events till early afternoon. So join us. We will live stream it on YouTube as well. Registrations are closed for tomorrow, but still open for
Thursday and
Friday. But let's not forget to thank our sponsors, especially Cisco Academy for giving us those vouchers, and also IC² for coming on board and speakers for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you once again, Mr. Christie, for joining today, and for it was a wonderful, wonderful event. The workshop was brilliant. I think we've got a lot of positive feedback also. So thank you once again. It was an immense pleasure to have you on board. It was actually a privilege, I would say. So
thank you so much for having us. So look forward to many more events as this in the future.
Thank you, Sujit.
Thank you.
To remind the
For the
participants.
rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we do want to remind the participants that the certificates for joining the sessions will be sent to them. So give us a week or so, but all the certificates will be mailed out to you. Thank you, Sujit, and we hope to see you tomorrow in the panel discussion. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Looking forward
Have a good
to it.
evening.
Okay, have a good evening. Take care. Bye.
Take care.